This is gonna take crackerjack timing, Wang.
Total concentration. You ready, Jack?
I was born ready.
So not too long ago, I came here on the channel and I gave my top 10 favorite comic book characters and a little bit of information on why I love them so much. And the response was good. And I got some feedback from the viewers. And somebody, I'm sorry, I forgot the actual viewer that requested this, requested my top 10 favorite comic stories of all times. Absolutely, baby. I love talking about this stuff. This is a lot of fun. So I cannot wait to get into these. There's going to be a few of them, obviously, you already know. Like the top 5 of my favorite comic stories of all time are literally locked in stone. They're not changing. It would take something monumental to kind of displace those. But the ones underneath are a little bit more fluid. But this is how I rank them right now today. I got a lot of great comic stories from DC, Marvel, got some independent stuff there for you. Obviously, if you watch my favorite characters, you're going to know a few of these are. Or if you've been watching the channel, you're going to know some of those. Now, there's not anything like super duper current. Also, nothing really from the gold or silver age. Unfortunately, it is a bit of a blind spot for me. It's something that I know that I need to get back out into and explore a little bit more. So a lot of these things, are going to be from like the 70s into like maybe the 2000s. That's when most of these stories took place. Although there might be one or two a little bit more recent. And now let's get into the actual top 10. My number 10, I really, really like the Black Mirror from Scott Snyder and Jock. I'm not going to say that I prefer Dick Grayson as my Batman. I honestly do prefer Bruce Wayne. But my preferred Batman and Robin is like Dick Grayson and Damian Wayne. I just think it's a perfect mixture. And I really enjoy that. But I like the Black Mirror. This thing is so dark. It is so nasty. I believe this is the story that's got Scott Snyder the writing gig, the full-time gig on Batman, and you can absolutely see why. And he definitely ran with that opportunity and did great things on his Batman series. But if you've never read the Black Mirror, you are missing out on some twisted stuff. Basically, the story of just how evil and sadistic Jim Gordon's son is. It's absolutely frightening. There's so many big reveals in this story. The depiction of Jim Gordon Jr. almost feels like the silent cannibal from Sin City. Absolutely terrifying. I will say this about the ending. The ending of this comic book made me sick to my stomach. Even though Batman technically won, the final reveal of what Jim Gordon Jr. had done to the water supply and the fact that he might have turned an entire generation of Gothamite children into sociopaths was absolutely terrifying. Just left a knot in my stomach for about 30 minutes after reading this. I love the Black Mirror. Terrific stuff. I don't like comics normally to go this dark, but if you're going to do it right. And absolutely Scott Snyder knocks out of the park there. My next one up, I really, really, really love Days of Future Past. X-Men, Uncanny X-Men 141 and 142. Chris Claremont on writing, John Byrne and Terry Austin on art. It is absolutely mind-boggling. Everyone always says, whoa, Chris Claremont, he was the master of the slow burn. He could tell a story over 50 issues. And he absolutely could. He could plant the seeds and get everything going. And then finally, when it finally hits you, you didn't even realize what he was setting up. But he could also tell a pretty damn amazing story in 2 issues. The fact that they were able to mine an entire movie out of a 2-issue comic story is amazing. If Jonathan Hickman tried to do a Days of Future Past story this cool in today's comic book universe, this thing would be 32 issues with 47 tie-in comics. The fact that he was able to achieve so much with such limited real estate just really tells you what great comic book creators Chris Claremont and John Byrne are. They are absolute masters. Obviously, we did see something similar to this with Ram V's Future State Swamp Thing, where he had 2 issues and he told something amazing. I do believe this is better. But I can't really think of another creator besides maybe Ram V that could do anything close to this. With that few pages to tell the story, and the fact that this story is still thought of as one of the iconic X-Men stories today, tells you that Chris Claremont was not just a master of the slow burn. He can literally do everything. He is one of the 3 or 4 greatest comic book writers of all times, in my opinion. Next up, Another comic book that I absolutely love. Ed Brubaker makes the list officially in the top 10 with Captain America the Winter Soldier. Steve Epting on art. Many people say, including myself, that Ed Brubaker's Captain America truly is the last competent Captain America run that we've had. And really, I think the crown jewel of that run is Captain America the Winter Soldier. Basically goes back, fleshes out the origin story of as far as what Captain America Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes were doing in World War II. We learned that Bucky was much more than just a plucky little sidekick. He was actually like the operations specialist. He was the one that was sneaking in and doing all the surveillance and bringing back all the intelligence for U.S. forces while he was out there with Captain America. A fantastic reimagining of the origin. But then when we get to the main event, we see that Bucky Barnes was also kept on ice, and he was used as an assassin for very many years, and finally Steve Rogers realizes it's best friend. This is a wonderful comic book story, excellent art. If you haven't read Captain America the Winter Soldier, you've only seen the movie, you are missing out because the comic book absolutely blows it away, and the movie is fantastic. Next up is the second appearance of Batman on my list. Many people believe that Frank Miller's Batman The Dark Knight Returns is the greatest Batman story ever told. Certainly, it's one of the most iconic. It probably is the most influential Batman story ever told. But in my opinion, not only is it not the greatest Batman story ever told, it's not the greatest Batman story Frank Miller ever told. I think that belongs to Batman Year One. With the phenomenal David Mazzucchelli on art, this will not be the last time you hear about Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli being on my list as far as the top 10 comic stories I've ever read. I absolutely love this comic book, and it's basically the early years of Bruce Wayne as Batman as he's trying to become this vigilante and become something bigger than himself, and finally incorporate his mission and clean up Gotham with the help of a brand new rival to Gotham City, James Gordon. Now, many people will say that Frank Miller was the original master of deconstruction along with Alan Moore, but I believe that what he builds as far as Batman Year One and the foundation of what Bruce Wayne was in his early years that builds up and also influences an entire generation of Batman writers. I think it's done better in Batman Year One. I think it's a better version of Batman. And I love seeing Bruce Wayne when he's a little bit more vulnerable, not quite ready for prime time, and making some mistakes every now and then, and even failing. I quite enjoy that. So if you have not read Batman Year One by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli, you're absolutely nuts, and you are missing out on one of the greatest, or in my opinion, the greatest Batman story of all times. Next up, let's get to a big event. Now, I think most modern events tend to be a bit letdowns. They're probably too big, and so you might be surprised that I'm including an absolutely enormous event on my list, Blackest Night. It was very hard to keep Blackest Night on the list and not kind of in place of Sinestro Corps, where I didn't want to have a whole list of Green Lantern stories by Jeff Johns, so I went with the one that I think is better. But really, you can't go wrong with either one. But Blackest Night, you're talking about an event comic that absolutely delivers. Not only in the fact that it introduces so much lore and cool things just as far as the DC universe, specifically like the Green Lantern mythos and things like that. But when Blackest Night is over, there is an enormous amount of change to the DC universe that has happened. This wasn't one of those mamby-pamby modern comic events where literally anything could have happened, and in the last page they just would have introduced you to the next event. Although Blackest Night was followed up by Brightest Day, that was kind of a continuation of this, but so many cool things happen in this. This is Jeff Johns at his finest. Also, Ivan Reis is absolutely stellar in this comic series. I cannot believe that they actually were able to deliver on such an enormous idea. Just the idea of Blackest Night and all the new Lantern Corps, specifically the Black Lantern Corps, and the effects on the DC universe was widespread. So many cool moments. You get so many really great character moments in this, but without a doubt, it's one of my favorite moments, like series of pages in DC Comics history, is when you start seeing all of your favorite heroes don the rings from the different Lantern Corps, and you finally get to see who would be a Blue Lantern or a Red Lantern or a Green Lantern or a Yellow Lantern. It's absolutely spectacular. I love Blackest Night. If you haven't read that, don't go and read all the stuff that's on here. That's the the add-ons. Just go read the main series. Otherwise, you're going to be reading Blackest Night tie-ins for the rest of your life, because it was absolutely enormous. But if you go and read the main event, you are going to be very happy. What an excellent comic book event. They certainly don't make them like they used to, and Blackest Night isn't all that old. Next up, we've got my favorite Superman story, Up, and Away. This is from Jeff Johns, Kurt Busiek, Pete Woods on art. This happens at a period of time where basically Superman has lost his powers. He's just Clark Kent. I believe he loses powers. This jumps, I believe, ahead in 1 year after the fact that happened. And in that time, he has basically become the premier reporter at the Daily Planet, superseding his wife, Lois Lane. His marriage to Lois Lane has never been stronger. It turns out, and I think that was the intention of Kurt Busiek and Jeff Johns in this, is that the powers that Clark Kent Superman has are not what makes him a hero. What makes him a hero are his morals, his values, and his determination to go and help people and do what's right. You get that in spades within the series. Unfortunately, this is not currently in print. So if you want to go find a copy, you're going to have to go and find it on eBay or whatever. I cannot wait for them to put this back into print. It should be. This is the quintessential Superman story as far as I'm concerned, because it's showing that Clark Kent is the man behind the superhero. It's what he learned on the farm with his parents, the way he conducts himself in his day-to-day life. That's what makes him Superman. That's what makes him a hero. And my favorite part of this, it's a wonderful moment. Superman is out. He's put himself in harm's way. The mob's trying to kill him. I think he might be tied up with Lex Luthor at this point. But I think it's Supergirl, Green Lantern. There's another hero. I think it's Hawkgirl. They go in there kind of for the save, and they help him out, and they're on the rooftop. And Green Lantern explains to him, like, listen, Clark, I know that, you've been depowered, you don't have your powers anymore, but you're still a hero, and we've got a Green Lantern ring waiting for you. And he puts it on, he raises up into the air, and he's got the Green Lantern glow. And guess what he looks like? Clark Kent. He does not see himself as Superman. And it was wonderful to say that even Clark Kent knows that he's the man behind the hero, and I absolutely love Superman Up, and Away. Next up is my number 4 comic book, Frank Miller and Dave Mazzucchelli's Daredevil Born Again. As far as I'm concerned, if you want to see how to do deconstruction and do it well, you need to go read Daredevil Born Again. Most people would say Watchmen or Batman The Dark Knight Returns, but I personally believe that Daredevil Born Again is the premier deconstruction. Yes, you can take a character all the way down to their lowest. You can take supporting characters and turn them into crack whores and all this kind of stuff, but you have to build them back up better and with more resiliency and more determination than ever before, and that is exactly what Frank Miller delivers in Daredevil Born Again. This is another tough read, just some of the things that he puts Matt Murdock, Karen Page, and Foggy Nelson. He definitely puts them through the paces. There's a wonderful scene. It's one of my favorite pieces of comic book art that I've ever seen. It's what you're seeing right here. It's when Matt Murdock is down. He's discovered by the nun that we later learned essentially to be his mother. And it's one of the most beautifully rendered, emotionally captivating pieces of comic book art that I've ever seen. So much is said without saying anything. David Mazzucchelli, absolutely at the top of his game, along with Frank Miller. If you have not read Born Again, I don't know what to tell you. It's one of the greatest comic stories ever written. Next up, we are in the last of the big two. And you knew you weren't going to come away from a thinking critical top 10 comic stories of all times without hearing something about Alan Moore. Everybody heaps praises on Alan Moore for his work on Watchmen, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and so many other. Alan Moore's legacy, his portfolio, his resume in comics is sterling. It's second to none. Is he the greatest comic book writer of all time? It's hard to deny that. It would be hard to argue against it. But in my opinion, his seminal achievement is Saga of the Swamp Thing. And I'll just go with book 1, but you can read them all. It's absolutely amazing what he does. He essentially reinvents who Swamp Thing is. And once he lays the new foundation, he builds this character up into essentially what we see today, where he's, the keeper of the green. He's part of the Parliament of Trees and all that all those things. When I read Watchmen, and I think I've explained this on the channel a time or two, but I guess I'll do it here again real quick. When I read Watchmen, I did not get the character arc or progression of Dr. Manhattan. There was so many other characters and so many things going on, and it was hard for me to actually understand what's happening with Dr. Manhattan. It was one of the first comic stories I've ever read. It was a terrible idea. I don't know why I decided that was going to be one of the first comic stories for me to ever read. I read Saga of the Swamp Thing afterwards, and after I finished book one, I completely understood what Alan Moore was saying or telling about Dr. Manhattan. I think expanding upon that idea of what is humanity or the character struggling with his humanity, when Alec Holland realizes that he is not Alec Holland turned into a plant through some type of, science experiment or science accident gone wrong, that he is actually a plant that absorbed the memories and essence of Alec Holland, and he realizes he's no longer human, and he essentially has a breakdown, because if he's not human, why does he feel these emotions? Why does he remember these things? And you see that he has regrown all of his organs as a human, even though his lungs have no purpose. Just amazing storytelling. I can't believe that Alan Moore was able to take Len Wein's amazing creation and take it to another level. Obviously, Len Wein is one of the greatest comic creators of all time as well. And I have to talk about the artwork from Stephen Bissett. To think that he was so young when he did this, I think this might have been like his first major, actually I'm certain of it, it's his first major works as far as comic books. The layouts and integration of the character of Swamp Thing and the swamp and the characters he's interacting with, it's like nothing you'll ever see in your life. It's one of the most beautifully rendered comic books, if not the most beautifully rendered comic I've ever read in my life. That's definitely one of the things that you'll see, especially in the top four, is you're seeing some of the greatest illustrated comic books of all time, in my opinion. Whenever people talk about Alan Moore, they always talk about Watchmen. I say Saga of the Swamp Thing is his greatest achievement, and it's definitely one of the 3 best comic stories I've ever read. In my number 2 comic book story, it's actually my number 1 comic book character. It's Exo Man of War, Erica Dacia. This is going to encompass issues 1 through 14, so volumes 1, 2, and 3 of Robert Venditti's run with the character, with a relaunched Valiant Comics under Dinesh Shamdasani. Obviously, I believe Exo Man of War was the flagship character under the Jim Shooter days. He was also the flagship character under the Dinesh days. Robert Venditti was hand-selected to be the creator to bring him back to life. There is a deluxe printing hardcover that collects issues 1 through 14. I would highly suggest you go and find that if you can. But if you have to get the trades, it's volumes 1, 2, and 3. This is absolutely spectacular. This is the new origin of the character. Eric of Dacia is essentially out fighting the Romans. He's abducted along with a number of other Visigoths by some aliens. He goes into space, and essentially what Exo Man of War issues 1 through 14 are the best, in my opinion, modern day retelling of the Exodus saga from the Bible that you'll ever read. Obviously, it's not a direct retelling. It is an interpretation of that story for this setting in a sci-fi kind of fantasy superhero setting, but it's absolutely brilliant. The art by Cary Nord cannot be understated. I believe he did issues 1 through 6 and 11 through 14, but I might be wrong on that one. But he did I believe it's volume 1 and volume 3. I believe volume 2 is illustrated by Lee Garbett and Trevor Hairsine. But the Cary Nord stuff is absolutely brilliant. I have talked about on the channel what this story personally means to me. I talked about it in my 10 favorite comic book heroes all times video. I'm not going to go into that story again. I might cry on my channel again. I don't want to do that one. But this story in and of itself means so much to me. I absolutely love it. It helped me get through a very personal time. I love this character. Robert Venditti is my favorite writer for a reason. And Exo Man of War is definitely one of those reasons. If you have not read the first 14 issues of his Exo Man of War run, stop the video and go read it now. And then come back and find out what my number 1 comic story is. As many of you probably imagined, it is Rye by Matt Kent and Clayton Crane, also under the Valiant brand. When I saw this character, I fell absolutely in love with him. Look at the character design by Clayton Crane here. He's got swords. He's a samurai. He's got the Japanese flag on him. He's obviously in a future setting. All things that I absolutely love. I am an enormous sci-fi nerd as well as a comic book nerd. So this was ticking all my boxes just when I saw the character. I went in to read it, and I fell in love with the art by Clayton Crane. I'm shocked what he is able to do with digital art. As far as I'm concerned, he is the greatest digital comic book artist that we've ever seen. Obviously, it is in its infancy, but I think people are going to look back on Clayton Crane and what he was able to do specifically in this Rise series, and they are going to be shocked that he was able to do this when he did it. It's such an expansive world. It's very engrossing. So not only do you get this really great, sci-fi character, but the story itself has lots of elements of like The Matrix in 1984. Some of my favorite fiction stories of all time fell on top of it. Matt Kent is one of the underappreciated gems in all comic books. Hopefully he gets more recognition now that he's on that Berserker series from Boom Studios with Keanu Reeves attached to it. This is the perfect comic book story. And if you're going to read it, his Rye series encompasses Rye 1 through 16. Do not read 13, 14, 15, and 16. Just read issues 1 through 12. And that is the first 3 story arcs that get you ready for the 4000 AD story event that Matt Kent also wrote with Clayton Crane on art that essentially finishes that story. The other 4 issues are just added information about the history of Rye, not specifically this Rye, but other Ryes that came before him. The story gets finished up in 4001 AD, issues 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's fantastic. As far as a story, Rye 1 through 12, 4001 AD 1 through 4 is the perfect comic book story as far as I'm concerned. I certainly got everything I ever wanted, and I could not recommend this comic story more highly. You all know what that Exo Man of War 1 through 14 meant to me personally. And I find this story even more enjoyable. It's hard to choose between those 2 stories, but if I have to choose one, it's absolutely Matt Kent and Clayton Crane's Rye 4001 AD story arc. And that does it, folks. Those are my personal 10 favorite comic book stories of all time. Got a lot of great creators in there. Frank Miller, we got Alan Moore, David Mazzucchelli, I've got Robert Venditti, Matt Kent, Jeff Johns, Ed Brubaker, Chris Claremont, John Byrne. A lot of wonderful creators in this top 10 list. If you have missed any of these, I highly suggest you go and read them for yourself. I think you will love them just as much as I do. Now, you got to tell me, what are your 10 favorite comic stories of all time? And what would you like me to talk about next? I want to hear about that in the comments section.